The Six Nations Show on OTB Sports Radio.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team, we all belong to the team of us.
It's spinning! It's spinning!
Can you come on and talk about Ireland's attack shape? It's really exciting.
I've never seen a team like Ireland before.
We all still think to this day that it's the right call and we're the ones out on the pitch.
OTB Sports Radio.
All right, welcome along to the Six Nations Show. Nathan with you this evening. Rúaidhrí O'Connor of the Irish Independent is in studio. Evening, Rory.
Hey, Nathan.
And Louise Galvin should be on the line. Evening, Louise.
Good evening, Nathan. Hi, Rory.
Hey, Louise.
So we are all building up to Saturday at Twickenham, 4:45 kick-off, Ireland against England in the Six Nations. Andy Farrell this lunchtime named his squad that will travel as expected. Well, wholesale changes from the game against Italy, but Johnny Sexton is back in the starting 15 alongside Jameson Gibson-Park at half-back. Bundy Aki restored to the midfield to partner Gary Ringrose, while Andrew Conway and Hugo Keenan come into the backfield alongside James Lowe. So Mac Hansen and Robbie Henshaw drop out of the side. Henshaw is on the bench. Hansen isn't going to be involved. Then in the pack, Cian Healy, as expected, comes into the front row alongside Dan Sheehan and Tadhg Furlong. Tadhg Byrne and James Ryan line out in the second row. And then Peter O'Mahony, Josh van der Fleer and Caelan Doris make up the back row. Doris at number 8. Jack Conan only among the replacements. Ian Henderson also there as well, and a really experienced replacements bench. Rory, there's a lot of changes, a lot of talking points. Some of those changes were expected, but Bundy Aki ahead of Robbie Henshaw, Andrew Conway coming in ahead of Mac Hansen. Is that the way it had been looking all week?
Yeah, I think the Aki one in particular was well flagged, because Robbie Henshaw, for all that he is exceptional and was Ireland's best player last year, just because of the different interruptions to his season, hasn't hit the heights this year. And when he got his opportunity against Italy, he just didn't quite nail it. And it's fair enough. It would be very difficult to take Aki out of the team and reward Henshaw for that performance. And having him on the bench is, we worry about Ireland having impact on the bench. Well, Robbie Henshaw is someone who can come on and change a game with 25 minutes to go. So that's a sensible call. I think Conway and Matt Hansen, that was a toss of the coin really, but Conway played very well in those first two games. I know we got bounced by the French at one stage, but everyone had a bit of a defensive scare in that game. But I think that makes sense to me, considering the way England played. They're a kick-heavy team. I think that backfield coverage, all that sort of thing, will be important. And you have to have James Lowe in the team because of his left-footed clearing option. He takes pressure off the team. So I think they're both the sensible calls. The one that I would probably not have gone with myself, I can see the rationale behind it, is the O'Mahony to 6 call. I probably would have liked to seen Tadhg Byrne there, Ian Henderson starting in the row. They've gone for O'Mahony. He captained the team against Italy. He obviously ran things well that week. He's a great line-out option matches up reasonably well to Courtney Laws. And I mean, you're tossing coins here. Like, they're all good players. They're all in reasonable form. It's just a personal preference. But that was the one that I worry. At the start of this tournament, Ireland had such power in their carrying game, and they've lost Porter, Kelleher, and now they're taking Conan out of the back row. I worry a little bit about that part of the game.
Louise, does that suggest anything different in terms of the game plan and what we should expect from Ireland this week?
I suppose, first of all, just I agree with a lot of what Rory said there as well, in terms of kind of where the thinking is behind a lot of those selections. I think certainly there, although Peter Mahoney's even said you don't go and say, okay, we need to just win set piece to win Twickenham. It's going to be a massive battle all over the field, in the open field, whether it be in the air or whether it be set piece. But I think what it does say, particularly with O'Mahony's selection, is they are targeting certainly around that line out that we don't want to concede ball, and we want to make sure we can push some amount of pressure on them as well. I think what was interesting is what Caelan Doris mentioned earlier in the week, in that he may have learned from playing England over in Twickenham particularly, that you can't just put your head down and take a player on when you're in the centre of those pods and maybe get tackled by two men and lose gain line. And then, as we know, the knock-on effect of that is huge as the game develops, and about being smarter about using their tip-on passes, their pluses, their minuses. So even that little comment shows that although you have to earn the right to play wide, and against Italy, when the match kind of descended with the numerical advantage that we have, we probably went a bit wide a bit early. We certainly have to earn the right to win that gain line. They're looking at how they're going to do it. So it's not necessarily about fronting up and just taking on whatever's in front of you, but about being a little bit smarter about where maybe those soft shoulders lie, about using those tip-on passes a little bit more. And that's where, we've seen a lot more of our forwards getting involved in that kind of level of open play, stepping into first receiver. Obviously, Ty Furlong, we've spoken a lot about how he has done it so well. But that it's not a case of just running straight into brick walls. So I think that is another kind of indication, even from Caelan Doris, about what way Ireland are thinking coming into this game, because it's quite an experienced English pack that they're coming up against as well. In terms of our selection, I think besides the front row, we probably don't have everyone at 100% full form. Like, obviously Johnny's just coming back, and as you mentioned, Robbie Henshaw, he's just been interrupted after a really good summer with the Lions as well, with different injuries and picking up concussion and that. But besides the front row, we've a fairly strong group to be picking from, and that's a positive as well. That this may not be the team that Andy Farrell always goes with, but it's a bit of a horses for courses, certainly.
Does that suggest, Rory, that the focus on training this week has been on the set piece, has been on the line out, has been getting those basics right? That's the real area that Andy Farrell has looked at?
Well, I don't think it's the only area. We've, as Louise touched on, I know O'Mahony said himself today, you can't just focus on those. The game is too varied to kind of hone in on one area. But when you have a team that has Maro Itoje, Charlie Ewells and Courtney Laws on the blind side, you have three viable line-out options. You also have Jamie George, who's an excellent hooker, throwing into the game. You've got a very strong scrummaging pack as well. You need to at least match up and try and get dominance in that area. Ireland have a very young and experienced but very talented hooker playing on Saturday in Dan Sheehan, so they need to support him as well by putting experienced forwards there who know how to do it, who know how to secure their own ball, who can think their way around it. Like Itoje will hunt them in the line out, and he's done a job on Ireland in the past. He'll have help. Laws is a really effective operator as well. So yeah, it's not the only focus, but I think it has to be. I think anytime you play against the best teams in the world, England, for all that they're not in great form at home, it's still one of the great tests of world rugby. So you got to get that right. And Ireland score a lot of their tries off line out, and if that goes wrong, then they'll be in real trouble. So they need to have nailed that. And O'Mahony is a line-out leader in that way, and he's brilliant at poaching opposition ball as well. If you think back to, I think it's the 2017 game against England at the Aviva Stadium, it was his introduction that got him on the Lions tour.
Yeah.
He ended up captaining the Lions based on his defensive line-out performance there. So I think he's there for the breakdown as well. The breakdown was a big problem in Paris. It was a big problem against Italy as well, although it didn't become an issue because Italy weren't strong enough and didn't have enough numbers on the pitch to make it. But you're not protecting your own ball. O'Mahony's a very good first arrival player. He might not be as sparkly as Conan and Luce, but he'll hit a lot of rucks for you, and I think maybe they're under resourcing the rucks as well. So that's a focus for them, I think, as much as the line out and the scrum have to be as well.
Louise, the breakdown's an area where Ireland have got rave reviews at times over the last couple of years, but as Rory said, against France maybe understandable, but less so against Italy, where listen, I don't know how much we can read into it, considering it was a bit of a dead rubber after about 20 minutes. What would you diagnose as been Ireland's problem at the breakdown over the last couple of games?
Yeah, and again, we don't want to create too much of an issue over this. I mean, I know this has become the stat of Six Nations 2022, but we're still leading this ruck speed race that apparently is nearly worth bonus points at the end of the season, the way it's been reported at the moment. But we are getting to these. I think we're the only team at less than 3 seconds on average of ruck speed. So we are getting there quickly. We are shifting that ball away. I think maybe against Italy again, you come away from your systems and your structures a little bit when, number one, you have a number of changes. Number two, even though everyone's trying to play as a team, everyone's trying to stand out and put their hand up and say, yeah, I want to be selected against England in 2 weeks' time again. And then you're thinking of all the space over the backfield. So maybe again, guys were reneging on just securing ball because they wanted to be first, second receiver and hope they were going to go through a gap particularly. But I expect that we'll pay a lot more attention to that area on Saturday. And against France, again, it's a bit of maybe naivety in that we played to their power game, or we let them bully us a little bit around the breakdown. And I think even Caelan Doris moving to 8 in terms of for our own work speed, I'm looking forward to seeing how he's going to be carrying ball, because if he's getting that gain line like he did particularly well in terms of metres carried against Italy, again, that'll help us to get over the gain line and move that ball away quickly again. But we have to be incredibly careful. Even England against Wales last week, I mean, Wales actually outscored them, or 2 weeks ago, or last week. Yeah, last week. 2 weeks ago. Sorry, we had a week off. Wales actually outscored them 3-1, but Marcus Smith tipping over penalties, and a lot of them were from ruck penalties from, again, Laws Itoje coming in, making an absolute mess of the breakdown. So that's going to be very well publicised this week in Irish camp, and Andy Farrell is going to be all over them in terms of, and Paul O'Connor as well, in terms of what they can do to prevent this mess at the breakdown, where it's well within our capabilities. It's just a bit more of maybe a focus compared to, you know, you go into any game, you might have 3 things that you really focus on against a particular team, and for us, protecting our ball against this particular English team, move it away quickly, and like again coming back to that, you can take that a step back, 2 steps back to your carries, not getting isolated, not picking battles where you're up against a 1v2, where again your support players has to come in laterally and try and make sure they're coming in through the gate. So it always goes back a few steps in terms of on your own ball. But I think it'll be a particular focus for the Irish squad on Saturday. And once we can secure that and keep our rugby going, which we know we can, and play with that tempo that Jameson Gibson Park brings, then that's where hopefully we get to see this exciting backline get unleashed.
Yeah, it was interesting. Ross Hamilton, the analyst, who's done some really good work in the Six Nations, pointed out that not only do Ireland have the quickest ruck speed, they also commit the fewest numbers to it, which is a great, when it works, it's amazing because you've got more attackers on your feet than everyone else. But I think France and Italy both spotted that and tried to exploit it. And if you think of Taufi Fanua blasting through the Irish ruck to create that opportunity, I think it was for Baye's try towards the end of that game in Paris, you know, I think maybe they need to maybe sacrifice that one attacker to secure that ball. That maybe, you know, when you've got a Itoje, you've got the forwards that England have to come and attack your breakdown, as Louise has touched on, like they did against Wales. That's where you may run into problems, and you might have to sacrifice one member of one of your pods just to make sure that you're not getting turned over. And they're even just slowing the ball down for Gibson Park, because Ireland have been vulnerable there the last couple of weeks.
And is that something you just expect Andy Farrell to learn quite quickly from the France game, that you can't read too much into Italy, because again he can't afford to take those risks against Italy, but actually the comparison is more, the learnings are all from France?
I think France is definitely the one that they'll have taken a lot more from. I mean, Italy was pretty much an hour of garbage time because it was against 13 men. It was just, and uncontested scrums, which meant that the Italian defenders were less tired, you know. But you would hope that they're, well, I suppose that what they want is a balance. They don't want to lose that attacking edge that was so potent against Wales and in November. And if you take even one attacker out of your line, you may lose that advantage because you've one less player for the defenders to worry about. But there's no point in having that man out there if you don't win your own ball. So do you get more efficient and more effective for your 2 men? Do you expect more of them, and you kind of ram that home in the training? Is Paul O'Connor now drilling those first 2 arrivers to be better at protecting themselves from the counter ruck? That's, you know, we'll see that on Saturday. To be honest, I wish
that's something you can tell in the first 2 minutes.
You should be, yeah. I mean, it might only take one ruck for it to all come crashing down, but you will know the physical tone will be set early in this game.
And if it does, Louise,
I think as well, sorry, in relation to that point, territory is important. Like again, Wales, 3 minutes into that game, they get a turnover, they get a penalty, and Thomas Williams taps and goes, and then Cuthbert gets isolated. I think I'm not exactly sure who turned over the ball, and Marcus Smith is first 3 points on the board. But I don't expect Ireland to do that unless something is incredibly on. I mean, we're gonna have an exit plan from there. We're gonna kick the line and use our line out. So again, like, this isn't a brilliant English team at the same time, in that I don't know Eddie Jones knows his best team. I mean, even if you look at, like, obviously they tried to bring back Tulagi, unfortunately for him, massive injury concerns again, hamstring went. He brings Daly in for Marchant. Now he's swapping Marchant back in for Daly. He doesn't really know who his best team is. He's a mix of, you know, he's trying to more blend the newer players, and there's a lot of guys there, like particularly obviously Randall and Smith. I think we need to target them because they're the more inexperienced guys, and you know, Smith, he gets an armchair ride against Italy. He's picking up player of the match awards like the new time, but we need to put him under a lot of pressure. We need to put Randall under a lot of pressure to see how they're going to cope with that kind of defensive line speed that Ireland have been bringing.
we've known for a while that Porter and Kelleher weren't going to be playing. It's Cian Healy and Dan Sheehan who come in. I think everyone expected Sheehan. Cian Healy is going to win his 115th cap. It's felt that Cian Healy's been sort of a 20-minute man for a couple of years at this stage. They'll be expecting him, presuming 55, 60 minutes. It's... What is he, 34 at this stage?
34, and he's a massive amount of mileage on the clock. I mean, it's 115 caps. It's how many games for Leinster?
I think we were writing him off about 6 years ago.
I mean, the doctors wrote him off. He was advised to retire in 2014 or 15, and he with a neck problem, and I think he had the papers in front of him and didn't sign. Decided to go again, and it took him a long time to get back from that injury. Made it to the World Cup that year, but it was the following year he had a kind of a renaissance in his career, and he is still a very, very, very good loose head prop. But he's coming in for and 10 years ago he was Andrew Porter. He was able to do many of the things that Andrew Porter's able to do. He ran over Man Onu in that 2013 game, and was, at a time when Man Onu was at his peak. He's not that player anymore. He is much more, and this might sound insulting to him, but I think at this stage of his career he's more meeting two edge. He will hit his rucks. He will carry in the tight. He will scrummage very well. But Porter is X factor. But Porter is one of these players who can do it all. He's a very prototype modern prop, and as part of that Kelleher Furlong Porter axis that was so potent. Sheehan is as athletic as Kelleher. He's maybe not as good a scrummager. He's more like for like. But then you're bringing Rob Herring off the bench, who doesn't do what Dan Sheehan does. Very good line-out operator, very good scrummager, hits a lot of rucks, but he doesn't touch the ball very often, and that's where you're losing things. And then you've got Dave Kilcoyne stepping in, who in 2019 was really, really quality, but we haven't seen him at this level for a while. He can get back there, but he's also aging at this stage of his career as well. So, that's where I think, you looked at that 8 that Ireland had at the start of the tournament, and you thought every one of them is a ball carrying option. I think now you're back to 6 of them are ball carrying options, and when you start using your bench, you get fewer and fewer ball carrying options, and that's where I'm a bit concerned about the weekend, because that's where Ireland's strength was built on in November. Healy, an incredible servant, and still has a role to play for Ireland, but it's a bit of an indictment of the depth below Andrew Porter now, that there isn't someone younger and fitter who can come in and start in his place, and they've still got 2 guys in their 30s as their starter and a guy coming off the bench. They'll do a job. I don't see them being the issue in the scrum or anything like that, but I do think it weakens Ireland in the attack.
We do build these depth charts, and because of that, Louise often say that Ireland have a lot of depth because we can name the 4 or 5 players in every position who would fill in if somebody's missing. It does show that there are very specific parts of the pitch though that Ireland do lack some depth in, and listen, Cian Healy's legacy isn't going to be, we're not going to make or break it on what happens this week, but to lose 2 players of that quality, it does feel as though there's a big step down in an area that we haven't massively focused on because we haven't had to, because they've been sort of bulletproof over the last while.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you can obviously go through provinces, and it's not that we don't have potentials there, but I think again it's the drop down from number 1, number 2, and then again when your 2 becomes your 1, so like your Cian Healy becoming your starter and your Dave Kilcoyne coming in behind, then it's a case of who is next in line or who is after them, and how much experience or exposure have they had. The one positive you could say is in terms of balance, like Dan Sheehan doesn't have a lot of experience, but he's seriously athletic, explosive athlete, and then Cian Healy can balance that, at least coming in, that he has so much experience and he is so solid. It's more how much his body can take and how he's going to last the pace over there, because England you can imagine they're going to target our front row or front 5. But at least there's a little bit of balance there even between them, and obviously Ty Furlong being such a world-class tight head that we have, then it's obviously brilliant having him still there, but at least there is that little bit of a balance there, that we're not picking 2 up-and-coming but inexperienced guys in the guise of Sheehan, or 2 particularly maybe coming towards the end of their career guys, and that we're not getting much impact off the bench either. I think then that leads to the kind of the second row discussion, in terms of a lot of people are pushing for Henderson to come back in just because it's that extra bit of physicality, but then trying to find a place for Tadhg Byrne, who's just hasn't put a foot wrong, and I know people are calling for him to go to 6 and hold on to James Ryan, and again there's question marks even over James Ryan's position, which is unheard of nearly 2 years ago when he was considered a nailed on Lions and the next Irish captain incumbent. So again, like one word that Andy Farrell alluded to in his press conference is about the balance, and he's looked at the balance of this whole squad, and particularly I think that front eight, and trying to, I suppose, target the areas that he feels Ireland can exploit England, and likewise trying to negate any weaknesses so that England can't come back and attack Ireland, like in areas such as the breakdown and the line out that we've already touched on. But I think, the first two scrums are going to be a huge turning point for the game on Saturday to see how we get on, because I do think England are going to try and that's where they're going to try and really put the squeeze on, because once you start going, behind Smith, I think England are probably a little bit more worried about our backline, particularly if we do get that front football. But I think it's up front, it's where they're going to try and run over the top of us.
Just on James Ryan, like Louise touched on it there 2 years ago, he would have said nailed on for the Lions, maybe a contender for a Lions captaincy, certainly on a par with Amaro Itoje. Do you look at the two of them now and say they're on a par?
I don't think he ever quite got to being on par with Itoje. I think he was in 18, he was the dominant force in the Six Nations in his position. That's 4 years ago now. He's still very, very good, but Itoje, I think, scaled even higher heights. I mean, he's a two series Lion. That's in 17 and in 2021. He was very, very good on the Lions tour. He's got to a World Cup final, and two of the greatest individual performances I've ever seen live were Itoje in the 2017 Lions win over New Zealand in Wellington, and then this World Cup semi-final win over New Zealand in Yokohama. He was just incredible in those games, and I don't think Ryan has ever dominated a game in the same way. But they're different players. I think with Ryan, Henderson and Byrne, they really should be all going for the one spot. They're all number 5 locks, and what you want, we don't have number 4s. We've trying to be signed. If you think of Quinn Roux, Jean Klein were signed. They're those big scrummaging locks that are there to kind of provide the size, the tractor locks like Paul Villemse over in France. Ireland don't produce athletes of that size. Leinster are really excited about a guy called Joe McCarthy who's coming through, because he has that profile. Otherwise we kind of sign them from overseas. What we're doing is we're trying to make it work with players of the same profile. Henderson is the closest thing to that, and really I think if Henderson was flying, it will be one Henderson plus one, usually Ryan. But Byrne is playing so well, that's really hard to leave him out of the team, even though he's probably the lightest of the three in terms of that scrummaging side, in terms of hitting rucks as a first arriver and shifting those rucks in the way of a Taufa Fanu or a Villemse. Ireland just don't have a player of that size. So that's why people are talking about putting Byrne to 6, and I like that idea. I think that really could work for Ireland, because he has a breakdown threat as well. Ultimately, we just need to kind of have bigger children, and in 18 years' time we bring them all through. But we just genetically don't have that profile of player. McCarthy, there's a lot of hope on, but there's still a lot of there's a lot of time before he comes through. Otherwise, you look at the academies, we produce loads of those number 5 locks. Ryan, Byrne, Henderson, and Ryan Baird are all really good number 5 locks, but they're not that kind of big tractor scrummaging number 4. And that's
how much bigger do they need to be?
A little bit bigger, but it's a big difference. It's more about their power. It's the power to weight ratio, all that sort of stuff that they bring through. You want your that scrummaging lock at being about 120 kilos plus. Like Villemse is enormous. Taufa Fanu is enormous. These are just, we don't I think Neil Francis has written before that he was the biggest baby born in Ireland in 1970, whatever. And that's kind of what you need. You just need to get these massive men, but also have the athletic prowess and fast twitch timers, all those things that come together, plus your rugby playing ability, to be able to kind of develop a world-class lock. And we just don't have, that's not our genetic profile, and we kind of need a kind of once-in-a-generation player. They're hoping that's going to be McCarthy, but I think that's probably the next World Cup cycle.
All our rugby and off the ball is with Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us. It is the Six Nations show. Nathan with you this evening. Rúaidhrí O'Connor is in studio. Louise Galvin on the line as well. Looking at the back line, Louise, Mac Hansen is the eye-catching one in terms of missing out, not in the match day 23. Andrew Conway's back in. Would you go along with Rory that I suppose Mac Hansen took the headlines as a new player coming through, providing the finishing touch, getting the tries, but that Conway actually had done well in those first couple of games, and his experience means he needs to be back in?
Yeah, I would go along with that. Look, I don't think Mac Hansen has done anything wrong. He took the opportunities that were afforded him. But I guess it's not that if we even bring James Lowe into the conversation, James Lowe didn't miss out because he lost form. He missed out because of injury at the beginning, which afforded Mac Hansen the opportunity. And I definitely think when you're, again, talking about Ireland controlling that territory, using James Lowe's left boot is going to be a huge part of the game. Again, the last day, I know previously when he first spoke onto the squad, there was question marks over his defensive capabilities, but as he as he literally did into the camera after the New Zealand game, you know, he he has answered some of his critics in some of his more recent performances. So he deserves to get a shot back in. And then in terms of Andrew Conway, I just think he brings that solidity. He's, for a guy who's not the biggest guy and doesn't seem to have the biggest vertical jump, CMJ either, he just makes a contest of every aerial battle that he has in terms of us, if we're putting up contestables, and then from a defensive point of view as well, that I think it's more the solidity that he offers. And then again, if you have that balance, like if you've Lowe coming in, being that kind of roving, like blindside winger coming in as much as possible, that Hansen did so well, particularly in that first game against Wales, and then you have a bit more of a structured kind of more aerial battle in terms of what Andrew Conway can produce, then there's a bit more maybe balance between maybe going, let's say, for example, Hansen and Lowe. So I do think that it's as predicted, and as I say, some people forget with, you know, Hansen got in because of an injury and that player's back and he's fit. So you know, slightly differently with the forwards in terms of Jack Cohn, and he slightly lost a bit of form, particularly in that French game, didn't have one of his best games, and that's how he probably got squeezed out a little bit. So I would go with the balance that, and obviously Hugo Keenan coming back in again was pretty much a cert, along with Johnny Sexton. So he was speaking earlier this week. This will be his first, I think, full house at Twickenham. He struggled a little bit against England in the Autumn Nations Cup, I think, last year in Twickenham, and he said he certainly learned from that, and he knows they're going to target them again, and he's barely put a foot wrong since either side of the ball. So I've no doubt he's just going to grow more and more with this game.
Mac Hansen's dropping is good news for Dave McIntyre, who's already scripted his return of the Mac when he goes over for a try against Scotland. It's perfect for the headline writers, isn't it? Absolutely,
yeah. No, he's a bit of a headline writer's dream.
Are we going to get through a full Six Nations show without talking Johnny Sexton, Joey Carberry? Is there anything to talk about this week? Is there any debate? Was there any debate, do you think?
I wouldn't think so. I think, like, when you see Johnny signing on till 2023, you can now, like, there's no doubt that the plan is that he will be fit and firing, whether that's a good plan or a bad plan.
Was he asked about his last time going to Twickenham in the Six Nations?
Andy Farrell was asked today, is that a factor? I'm like, I can't remember. I can't remember who asked the question, so I don't throw anyone under the bus.
Brian O'Driscoll was saying in his farewell tour was his last time at Rodney Parade.
I thought Brian made a really good point on that, because Johnny actually said at the start of his press conference, I just wanted to get this done, and so the questions would stop, and then the press conference became, how do you feel, Johnny? You know, how do you feel about this and this? And by the end, he actually said, "I'm not sure I should have announced this in this week." And Paul O'Connell had this as well. You know, when we went I remember going to Cardiff, it was like, "This is your last time in Cardiff." Like this is what it becomes, and like,
well, every niggle, every injury that Johnny Sexton picks up will be, is that the last time we see Johnny Sexton on the pitch?
Yeah, absolutely. And every time he has a bad game, and like it happens from time to time, it'll be like, God, he's finished. You know, is he going to make it? So, like, I don't know if that's going to affect him. I mean, it was interesting that Brian said it did. But in terms of the Joey Carberry, there's an argument that maybe the roles will reverse over time, and that Johnny Sexton will become the player, like in the Italy game, who comes on and maintains standards from 60 to 80 and wins the game for Ireland in that role. And if you're going to win a World Cup, you're going to have to win 5 Tier 1 games in 5 or 6 weeks, and you're going to have to rotate those. So
do you think that's a possibility? Because one of the risks with Sexton is that at that age it's very easy to fall off a cliff, that you almost wake up one morning and the legs are gone, and that the decline is quite swift, and suddenly Joey Carberry steps in. But if Sexton stays fit, if he stays at the level he's at, is Joey Carberry good enough to close the gap to justify starting ahead of Johnny Sexton?
Well, it's not necessarily just about that. You know, it's about managing Johnny Sexton over a tournament. You know, like, if you think what Leinster do when they have, in the times where they've had Heineken Cup, what is it? It's Pro 14 semi-final. Oh, sorry, they've had Heineken Cup final, Pro 14 semi-final, Pro 14 final. They've rested him for the semi-final and started Ross Byrne. They've placed their faith in Ross Byrne, who the Ireland coaches believe Joey Carberry's a better player than, and they've gotten through those games. Maybe Leinster can feel, you know, the level is such that they can get through it without Johnny. If you're going to win a World Cup, Johnny's not going to play. I don't can you bank on Johnny Sexton at 38 starting 5 games against South Africa, Scotland, potentially New Zealand, I don't know, England and Australia, for example? You know, I've just picked up off the top of my head, but I think you have to have Carberry ready. Like, the New Zealand tour is probably the time where you do this. Maybe you start Johnny in the first test, you play Joey in the second test, and then Johnny comes back in for the third. But that's going to be part of the conversation, surely. And maybe next week against Scotland, particularly if Ireland lose, maybe that's another chance to get Joey out there. But for Twickenham away, when he's the squad captain, he's still the best. You pick your best players to play. Like Ireland have only 14 Irish teams have ever won in Twickenham. It's really, really difficult. It's going to take something special, even though they're favourites and they're seen as being a better team than England. It's still going to take something special to beat them. We don't ever win there easily, and I understand why they've gone with Sexton, but those conversations are going to have to start happening.
Louise, briefly on England, we don't need to talk about them because Ireland are such red hot favourites for this game, as Eddie Jones said. I think you touched on it earlier. Like, does he know what his best 15 is right now? Is that where the opportunity is for Ireland? Because it does feel Ireland have got to a level of performance over the last 9 months that you can trust them to go to Twickenham and produce something. With England, we're still not quite sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, there is an element of that with England. Obviously, starting off with losing away to Scotland, then a bit of a nothing game, like a 3-0 trouncing of Italy that, again, we can't really read much into. And against Wales, I mean, got up 12-0, scoring just after half-time. And again, the fact they didn't really score any try in that game, but they really created themselves, like it was a charge down by Dombrandt from an overthrow from Wales. That, could offer a little bit of concern when they're at home as well, and letting Wales come back into that game in the manner that they did. So I don't think he knows his best 15 or his best 23. I think he's trying to look at 18 months out from a World Cup, and he's trying to blood new guys. He's trying to put the fear of God into the maybe more experienced guys, but realise then he can't completely let them go either. But if they were to lose, which is a very real possibility, against Ireland on Saturday, they then go to France on a French team who more than likely be going to the Grand Slam, and they could again end up with just 2 wins in the Six Nations for a second year in a row, and that'll put a huge amount of pressure on them, and that has to be in the back of his head that is a very real possibility. And I think, even the way he's coming out trying to big Ireland up such a massive amount this week, he definitely is feeling the pressure. There's no doubt about it. I know he's quite an enigmatic character, but yeah, they're under a huge amount of pressure, and he's trying to take it off the squad and the players themselves. But like an Ireland win, which does look like it's certainly it's nowhere near a guarantee, but it's very much on the cards. That it will put them under a huge amount of pressure as well. He does. Yeah, so
publicly, Eddie Jones like to operate in sort of a chaotic way that nobody knows what's going on. Do you think deep down, because he's been in this position before with England where there's been enormous pressure on him, there've been big question marks 18 months out from a World Cup, do you think he has a better idea of his starting 15, of his 23 inwardly than we seem to think from the outside?
Certainly outwardly he's quite bullish about the fact that this is all part of the plan, and that it's all about this 2023 project, and they're basically reinventing how rugby union attacks work. And he's got this rugby league coach in whose name I've forgotten, but that they're basically tearing it all apart and building it all back up with a young pair of halfbacks and a new backline. I think there's only one back who started in Dublin last year, maybe even none of them, and he's moved a lot of players on. And there is parallels. I think people who watch England closely see parallels between England now and what Ireland were like this time last year, and then it all came together for Ireland in that England game, and suddenly they went 9 games unbeaten and looked really, really good. So there is a chance that it's going to click, and it's going to click at some stage, but they do look quite disorganised. The chopping and changing isn't helping. You don't look at that pack and think it's as fearsome as the previous team. You look at that back line and you wonder, without Tuilagi, really is there the thrust there? So I don't know, I find it strange that the coach, the really highly paid coach of the most powerful rugby nation in the world, is allowed to finish 5th and potentially 4th this year, and is allowed to talk about 2023 as if these games don't matter, when they're charging more than £100 sterling to people to go and watch them in Twickenham. Like, these tournaments really do matter to them, and like England should be much higher up. Like, with the resources they have, his job is to harness those resources, and at the moment he's not. I mean, it's very risky to say I'm going to sack all these years off and we're going to go for that one tournament, when he's probably going to walk away at the end of it either way, whether they get out of their pool or win it. He's probably gone out the door. It's really weird. I can't. He's got so powerful over there. It's really, really strange. So I think he's got a very good track record, and he's a very smart man. I think he probably does have a plan in his head, and he's probably going to pull it off to some degree, and maybe Saturday's the day, but it's one of those things that until you see it, you won't really believe it. A bit like we were with Ireland last year.
Louise, thank you as always.
Thanks very much.
Louise Galvin there. Rúaidhrí O'Connor. Enjoy the Eddie Jones experience at Twickenham.
Thank you very much, Nathan.
All right, that is the Six Nations Show.
The Six Nations Show on OTB Sports Radio.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team, we all belong to the team of us.
It's spinning. It's spinning.
Can you come on and talk about Ireland's attack shape? It's really exciting.
I've never seen a team like Ireland before.
We all still think to this day that it's the right call and we're the ones out on the pitch.
OTB Sports Radio.